Okay, welcome to June the 12th. And this also serves as our 12th COVID-19 briefing. As we move into phase two of reopening, as well as changes to the PPP, we're going to be covering these as during this session. Today, we are joined by our statewide lobbyists, Jody Roth and Jenny Crittenton of Gloucester Main Street Preservation Trust. Jenny Crittenton is on the board of Retail Alliance, as well as serving on the governor's task force on the different phases of reopening. They will both be talking about legislative updates and details surrounding our current phase, which right now we are in phase two. We will also be joined by Misty Weinberger of Pixel Financial Group. She will answer any questions you have related to finances, loans, PPP, EIDL, payroll credits. Misty has just been a wealth of information and expertise, very well versed in the happenings with the CARE Act. As always, please submit your questions via the chat box throughout the meeting. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. Jody, are you with us? If not Jody, we'll go to Jenny Crittenton.
Good morning. I know Jody was having trouble with the link. I did send it over to her, so maybe she'll jump on in a hot second and do that. Do you want me to start with the guidelines first, or what would you like us to talk about first?
I think so. I think the guidelines are good, are appropriate. Okay.
So pretty much we're still in phase two. Apparently at the press conference yesterday, there was some indication of discussing a potential timeline for phase three on Tuesday. So we'll all keep our fingers crossed that that will actually happen a little quicker than maybe we anticipated. The numbers are still trending down, so that's all super positive, and we'll keep hoping that we can jump to phase three. I still have not yet received guidelines that show what phase three may look like, so I couldn't be able to tell you if we'll see larger percentages of the ability to have more customers in the store, or if this is going to keep most of us in phase two, but then maybe allow some businesses who haven't been able to function in some form of a normal capacity, maybe an opportunity to do so. So that yet remains to be seen. So first off, we can just go basically back through. I'll more so focus in, none of the general guidelines from last week we spoke have really changed. And if we want to focus in on restaurant and beverage, basically where we are here is, again, we're still at that 50% occupancy. And I wish I could get everybody to raise their hand to say, like, who's already dined in a restaurant since this happened? But we definitely have. And it's been nice to be able to do so. It brings us a bit of normalcy back to our lives. Again, it's that 6 foot distancing. Just make sure that you really are adhering to the cleaning requirements and using the EPA approved products that have been, you've been given links to in the guidelines. That has been super important. Make sure you've got some dedicated staff. So as tables are turning, you're making sure these things are getting wiped down. Thinking in terms of like checkout, if you do have people using your register, demarcate on the floor, 6 foot distancing where they can wait in line. But really what might be easier, if you can do it, if you've got a portable way of checking people out at their tables, is taking an iPad or something of that nature, or collecting, their credit card there. The best way is the iPad, where they can swipe their own card and not even touch your screen. But if you are using a screen in that way, that you're making sure you're wiping that down in between every single use. That's something that they definitely wanted you to do. We're still in the single use disposable menus, so do not be utilizing any of your laminated type menus. So this is single disposable, use it once, throw it away. on to the next customer. You can still seat larger parties, but you just have to make sure that if there's another table, again, that large party is 6 feet. And that's, think of back to chair to the next back of the chair. Yes.
So you mentioned yesterday during our executive committee meeting about the disposable plates and things that are going to be going into effect. I believe it's going to be July, correct?
So that
How is
was
that
the
going to?
polystyrene containers. So yeah, think in terms of like to go. However, if I understand, and Jody can certainly chime in, I believe it has to be voted on again in this next session in order for it to actually be a ban. So I think right now you're okay.
Okay,
And
just
then
wanted
of
to make
course,
sure.
plastic bags, that's been a big one, but it apparently is not affecting the restaurants. It's more like grocery, convenience stores, pharmacies, places like that. And that's going to be like a local option on a tax. So that would have to be enacted locally. Try to cohort your shifts of people. So you have the same people working together in case someone did come down with COVID. You haven't exposed your entire team. So think in terms of that. Team meetings, again, try to keep those to a minimum. That's been important as well. And let's see here. One of the biggest disappointments I've heard across the board from restaurants is that no one can sit at the bar. But that is how it is in phase 2. You are not allowed to have people seated at the bar. I'm not going to lie, I've certainly walked into places and where people are waiting for to-go food, they've parked it at the bar with a cocktail or something while they're waiting. And that's not allowed, not supposed to do it. But that is going to probably remain that way for a bit. They want to keep the aisleways clear for people who are walking through the restaurants. I do want to share something. We have talked in the past about the business owners not playing the role as policeman or enforcer related to the public mask rule. And on our main street, we actually have had some really, it's been extremely disappointing, some feedback from the community of people becoming extremely angry when a business owner has said, you cannot come in here without a mask. There's been cursing, money thrown at our restaurant owners. It's actually been basically abusive. And so just be careful. It's really not worth your safety to challenge people. Certainly, in some cases, you've got family members at home with very compromised immune systems. I think it would be super beneficial to craft with your employees the same messaging across the board. So if that is your situation, to remind people we're so happy to see you and we're so happy that we're open. I hope you understand that, we do have family that we come in contact with. We're taking all measures of precaution, and it's really important to us. And just try to soften that message versus just saying, don't come in because you don't have a mask on. It just seems to incite some anger with people. And it's been, I've been really disappointed to see that. I've heard about it, but I've had a firsthand account from some of our business owners. So I assume there's been a lot of others that have experienced that. So just be careful.
And let's remember that not all people have to wear masks, even
Right.
if you require it. If they have respiratory issues or things that prevent them, COPD,
Yep.
things of that nature, they don't need to wear a mask.
Yeah, they can claim, I think it's like exception number 6 under the public mask rule. And as a business owner, you're not supposed to challenge it. They don't have to provide you with any kind of medical documentation. However, as a business owner, you do have the right to refuse service to anyone. Just know the position it potentially places you in. I'll be so glad when we don't have to worry about any of this, because I think although COVID-19 has brought out the best in a lot of people in a lot of communities, it actually has done the opposite in some cases with some folks, and that's sad to see. So just be careful. Moving on, let's talk about farmers markets. We have a small farm market in our downtown that has remained open the entire time doing curbside service and such. And they're still very much encouraging, you know, those types of things, but also to be doing the same cleaning practices within those businesses. And then making sure that if you've got employees that are handling cash, particularly in between, that they are washing their hands in between each transaction. It's not enough to just have a little hand sanitizer up there in between. They really want you to go and wash your hands in between. So in some cases, if you have a really busy farmer's market like ours is, you have to have 2 registers open so that you can allow the employee to go and do that. So brick and mortar retail. So thinking non-essential, shopping and so forth. And that pretty much has stayed the same, but I noticed Phil said yesterday on our executive committee meeting, and I've heard this too, that thinking in terms of returns. So this is one of those things really not listed in the guidelines, but yet it's what you're supposed to do. When somebody, because you can't let someone right now go into a dressing room and try on something, you can most assuredly know that there will be returns made and probably a few more of them. But those clothing, when they are returned, or that product cannot go straight back onto the shelf. It has to sit somewhere, in essence, in quarantine itself. So just quarantine the product, and that way, I think it's supposed to be for 3 days, and then you are allowed to put it back out onto the floor. So that was something unusual to pay attention to. With all of our businesses, making sure you still have your signage. We've worked with ours, and instead of being kind of forthright about it, we've been very suggestive, like, please wear your mask. We know you're smiling underneath. Please maintain social distancing. We care about you. So we kind of softened that message. So I would encourage you to do that as well. But otherwise, brick and mortar, we're at 50% inside. I've seen some of the nationals opening, some still haven't. So we'll see. Some of those are a lot of try-on type models like Ulta, from the conversation we were having even yesterday. At fitness centers and gyms, they are still at a 30% occupancy inside, with a lot of sterilization taking place in between the use of machinery. So they're supposed to have someone dedicated to cleaning after each use. And thinking if you're a treadmill person, you need to have treadmills every 6 feet apart. So again, going back to the social distancing. Actually, I'm sorry, in fitness centers we go to 10 feet. So if you're having a class or you've got machinery, they want you to be 10 feet apart. And still encouraging outdoor activities. I know our YMCA is holding some classes outside, and they're doing 10-foot social distancing as well outside. It goes without saying that with all the ones that I've covered, that as a business owner, you are supposed to be requiring your employees to continue to wear a mask. And specifically to think the personal grooming, massage, acupuncture, barbershops, salons, those kinds of businesses, they have to have a customer keep a mask on the entire time. They're not even supposed to be performing any services that require them to remove it. I can tell you that if you're getting acupuncture or something like that and you're face down, you can take it off because your face is probably covered. But when you're seated up, facing forward and getting your hair done, you're supposed to keep the mask on the employee and on the customer. Often, particularly in that industry, they've got some industry standards that are even much more strict than what the state government has put out, and that's all linked to certain certifications that they have. So some of those are even checking temperatures, having you fill out paperwork upon arrival. And again, that's the choice of the business owner, but just be a bit careful. Make sure you cover your tracks, that you want to make sure you've got great records if you ever do find yourself in a situation with someone that has gotten COVID-19. And I'm seeing some questions.
Yes, one question is,
Sorry, this is Jody, and I'm sorry I'm late to the call. I've been just jumped off another call and don't know where you guys are in the process, but I apologize for jumping on late. I'm sure Jenny's been covering a lot of things.
Just guidelines, Jody. We've got some
Yeah.
questions here that you might be able to help weigh in on as well.
Okay.
So one question is, and this is from Lisa Bay, the salon that exposed 140 people had no cases due to mask wearing and procedures. I guess that's more of a comment. There's a question that, so no mask are worn if you have respiratory issues when going to the salon?
I can only speak to what's happening in the businesses I'm directly working with. Respiratory issue or not, you probably just won't get your hair done. I know ours are really adhering to some pretty strict guidelines related to the mask wearing in the salons. That may end up being an individual decision by the salon owner. Jody, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. The salons and spas are adhering to the strict law requirement of their customers wearing the mask. And I believe, excuse me, as opposed to like retailers and restaurants, as we've already advised, don't get into any sort of confrontation with a patron that does not want to wear a mask. And me personally, since I've been out, I have noticed like in restaurants, it's very lenient. Nobody's wearing a mask, obviously. I know that in the commons areas, you're supposed to, even in restaurants, but that doesn't seem to be being enforced because they can't. And retail stores are the same. I know I've been into a couple and people are wearing them and they're not wearing them and nobody is saying anything to them as they shouldn't. But yeah, when it comes to spas and salons, they are more stringent in requiring you to wear them.
Mm-hmm. Jody, there's a question on here. We were talking about that because you're not supposed to be allowing customers to really try clothes on right now. I see there's someone that said that there's definitely some stores allowing that, and they're steaming them right after they've tried them on. I don't know that it's directly really addressed in the guidelines as much as I'm hearing it's become like a practice that people are doing. I know that a lot of the larger retailers that have opened, you don't get to try them on. And if you bring them back, they're quarantining the apparel for 3 days before they put it back out on the floor. What have you heard?
Right, so retail clothing stores are supposed to not allow you. That is in the guidelines. The dressing rooms are supposed to be closed. I'm seeing a little bit and hearing a little bit across the board. The guidelines are there for everyone to follow. If an individual business wants to stretch those guidelines, obviously that's up to them, but the guidelines clearly state that no dressing rooms are allowed, and for the most part, that's what I've seen. And I think it's also because after each changing, you would have to go in and fully disinfect each dressing room. So if a business is going a little bit rogue, if you will, and allowing them to try it on and then steam, I don't see any harm in it. However, there is going to, I would suggest you go in and fully clean and disinfect the dressing rooms if that's the route you were choosing to take.
Yeah, and in the guidelines, I just found out it says meeting rooms and other enclosed spaces such as fitting rooms should be closed to customers.
Yeah.
I think Pam Catrenza has a comment to make. Pam?
Can I say a comment?
I got it. Okay, I couldn't unmute myself there for a second. Well, I'm going to work backwards just from what you just said. It's interesting, should and must, and I think that's what's been happening. That's why when you walk into a place that's supposed to have masks on, everybody doesn't. And I think if we as business owners are supposed to be enforcing it, Tina had sent around some signage that we could borrow the ideas from. I think it was 757s, but and I did that. I took their logo out and put mine in. It makes it a little easier to be displaying signage that you know, speaks for you before the customer has to engage with you. At least I found that to be true. And we've got it posted at the entrances and then inside the store as well. And we have 3 different ones. We've got the symptoms, the masks, and the 6 feet distance. So just wanted to throw that out. You can get that from Tina. The other is, we didn't talk about gloves like we've been talking about masks, but you know, being from the Hickory Farms world for so many years, we had a lifetime supply of gloves, because if you wear gloves, I mean, the minute you do anything but what you were doing with the gloves on, they're, you know, they're worse than your hands, because it's just, you know, they hold the germs. So gloves aren't really something that we're asking people to do, but we've seen people come in with them on. So that's been interesting. When you reference the idea of 2 people, Jenny, which I get, because, you know, you've got one person to do this and the other to do that. It's interesting because with the, you know, the amount of money that we're taking in, that we, you know, unlike what we used to be adding to our payroll is difficult too. So that's another balancing act that I'm finding to be difficult. And I would just say that I did have a very positive experience at a hair salon, even though I had to wear a mask, and my person fixing my hair wore a mask. They kept their door locked, and you only came in when you had your appointment, and they did take your temperature, and they had you sign something. What you signed wasn't a release, but it was, I've read your policies and procedures, which I don't think is a bad idea either. So anyway, I just wanted to share all that because I would listen to everything you had to say, and I just had some comments.
Well, just out of clarity, it's not the retailer, it's not up to the retail to enforce wearing a mask.
No, and I was, yeah,
It's a
none of that is enforceable.
Right. But
Okay.
I put the signage up, and we're not having any, most people show up with it on anyway. But like all of you have expressed, I go into Harris Teeter and half the staff doesn't have it on, and they say they don't like wearing it and it's optional. You know, I mean, they'll tell you that. And that's been going on for weeks. And just about anywhere I've been, it's, you know, I see 50% at best of people wearing masks. So no, I totally get that. And we're not certainly fighting with anybody. We're suggesting it, that, you know, that's what we're asking. And we also have masks, disposable masks available if somebody wants one.
I think Phil had a comment to make.
Yes. Actually, I'm letting my customers use dressing rooms. We only have 2 open, and because they need funeral suits or they need to get a suit, and there's no way that they can get a suit without trying it on and us altering it. So what we do is we only have 2 dressing rooms operating. There's 6-foot distance apart. After they try on the clothes, we sanitize the dressing rooms, and we have no choice. So I don't know if I'm breaking any laws there, but that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Well, just to be clear about it, the people who are enforcing that is the Department of Health.
Okay.
There's very few people, they're very limited to the amount of employees, and that really falls down to the locality, the municipalities, departments of health, and they're not going out citing people.
Okay, good.
Now, there is something I want to add while we, you know, to that. And just so that you're making sure your backs are covered, the Dolly is going to be posting, Department of Labor today, emergency regulations pertaining to COVID-19. There will be a 10-day comment period where we can voice our concerns or suggestions. And I'm working with our coalition that we've been working with throughout the General Assembly on these issues. I am going to be honest, I'm a little concerned as to what they're going to look like. I think it could possibly put a lot on you guys in terms of liability, just to be quite honest with you. So I just wanted to share, that's why another reason why I was a little late getting on here. I was on a call pertaining to that. And that might be something will be something I'll be sharing with you next week. In addition to RMA and trying to get everyone's thoughts on what these new emergency regulations that I am told are comprehensive in nature, which doesn't give me much comfort. And the ringleader with the Department of Labor overseeing it is in the governor's policy office, the workforce development leader. And so I just want to share that. We'll see what that looks like. And I'll be getting something out to you guys and discussing that with you and how it correlates to everything we're discussing here. You know, try to follow those guidelines as closely as you can just to keep yourself covered. But in terms of the mask, I will stand firm on, do not engage or get confrontational with anybody who doesn't want to have one on. But in terms of your employee guidelines, I would I would adhere to them very closely.
So what is your sense? We understand that nationwide, it looks like COVID-19 has started to spike. How will that impact? I understand Virginia is still low or still trending downwards. How do you think that's going to impact the guidelines or phase 3?
So the governor said yesterday he's encouraged by our numbers. He did not mention anything about the spike nationwide. I had a call yesterday with his deputy secretary, and they would not give me a timeline for phase 3, but they are encouraged by the numbers. So it's the same script we keep hearing, that this is data-driven, not date-driven. I would think that if our numbers in Virginia continue down the right path as they are now, my hope is that he'll mention something about phase 3 on Tuesday.
Okay, so that's good. That's good to hear. What about offices? Jenny, do you have any sense of offices? Like Retail Alliance, we are planning to reopen our office on the 22nd.
You certainly can.
In the common areas, is it just recommended to wear a mask, or?
There is, basically offices are going to fall under just the general guidelines for all businesses. And again, it's signage. So if you have someone that comes to the office that's not part of your employee team, that you have that signage we just talked about on the front door that would normally be at any other retailer or restaurant. And then it says to still encourage telework where possible, to kind of cohort your team, just like you were talking about yesterday, where you may bring in 3 or 4 employees on Tuesday and Thursday, and then you might bring some in on Monday and Wednesday and Friday, and make sure those folks are working together. And then if you are in a situation, and I think you've got a lot of single offices, but I'm not sure if you've got partitions, but to again have the 6-foot distancing between the office spaces. So if they're not separated by a wall, think in terms of doing that. Obviously having some kind of a policy in place that if someone's not feeling well, stay at home, allow them to work from home, to do that. And again, cleaning, think in terms of cleaning more so your commons areas, your restrooms, things like that, cleaning those a whole lot more often. I'm trying to think, I was looking for the restroom one. I think that might even be hourly if there's someone dedicated to doing that. Let's see here. But yeah, you certainly can do it. Also, too, if you have an employee
Mhm.
that is working for you
Yes.
and they have a sick relative,
Mhm.
then they have to be allowed to care
Yes.
for that sick relative.
Yes.
So just be aware that you've got some type of a policy in place to be able to do that. And using any kind of messaging instead of face to face, using email, even if it's office to office for, group messaging of that sort. Just trying to make sure you keep people as separated as possible. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
Okay. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. I want to thank both Jody and for Jenny for joining us this morning. And let's go ahead and move on with the program. Let's welcome our next guest this week, which is Misty Lineberger. Misty is here once again to share any updates about the application process, dates for filing, and what else you might need to know concerning small business loans. Please post any questions into the chat box. I know, Misty, that we had some changes that occurred last Friday after our COVID-19 briefing, and I'm sure you're going to key in on some of those changes. So with that, it's all yours, Misty.
Great. Okay, so surprise, surprise, I'm going to be talking mostly about the PPP again. But first, I wanted to address a couple of questions that I had received last week that I didn't really have answers to. And the first question was in regards to whether or not, if an employee chooses not to come back to work after you've received the PPP and can put them back on payroll, did you actually have to contact the VEC and report them? And the answer is yes. It's actually part of the legislation for the PPP that if you have an employee who refuses to come back after you've provided them with a good faith offer for the same hours and wages that they were getting before and refuse, then actually if you go to the VEC website, there's a great big old banner at the very top that you can click on that takes you where you need to go to report that employee. So the answer is yes, you do need to be doing that. Another question somebody had asked was, what happens with the PPP if your business ultimately didn't survive and you went out of business? Well, it's still under the same rules. And to be perfectly honest, they haven't directly given us guidance about businesses that go out of business. All we know is that they still need to use the money the same exact way as everybody else, and they still need to apply for the forgiveness of the loan. Now, in terms of what happens to that loan after that point, no direct guidance is given. So anybody who is in that situation, I would highly recommend that they still continue to pay their payroll until the funds are used, still apply for the forgiveness, and then contact a lawyer to talk to them about what they need to do, anything in terms of what they owe people once the business is shut down. Again, the PPP isn't personally vouched for, so I really don't know how that's all going to work and kind of moves its way into a legal area. And I've always promised my lawyers I will not practice law if they don't practice accounting. So now HR 7010 was passed, well, it was passed last week. It was signed into law last Friday. It's also called the Paycheck Protection Flexibility Act of 2020, which is a huge mouthful. So I'm still not referring it to it as that. Now, lots of changes came down the pike, but the one thing that you need to know is that if you are still intending to apply for this loan, you can only apply for it up through June 30th. After June 30th, the applications are no longer going to be available to apply for this PPP loan. As of last Friday, there was still a little over $148 billion in the funds. So there's still some room for those of you who think that maybe you do actually need it to apply for it. Now, in terms of the changes, I'm just going to go one by one here. One of the first changes they made is the terms of the loan. Under the original legislation, you had 2 years to pay off anything that was not forgiven at 1% interest, and the first payment was deferred for 6 months. Well, the problem with that is that people were going to start making their first payments before the PPP forgiveness application was finished processing. So they made some changes there. The new terms are now 5 years at 1%, and the first payment is deferred until after the forgiveness application has been fully processed. Now, the little fly in the ointment here is if you've already signed a 2-year contract, the banks are under no obligation to contact you and change that. You did sign a contract, and this bill does not automatically retroactively fix that contract for you. So you will need to call your banks if you decide that you want the 5-year term. You can keep the 2-year term, but if you choose to have the 5-year term, you're going to have to call the banks and start that negotiation process. Now, the rules on how long we have to spend this money have changed, thank goodness, from 8 weeks from when you receive the money to 24 weeks from when you receive the money. And we are no longer pigeonholed to expenses between February 15th through June 30th of 2020. They've extended it out to December 31st of 2020. So that has created a lot of flexibility and a lot of breathing room for a lot of people, because this was one area that people were really concerned about, especially given the very small, narrow period of time we could actually pay expenses. They call it the covered period. So they've extended that significantly. Now, I want to talk about the split that has been completely drilled into our heads. Originally, when they put the first legislation out, we had to spend at least 75% of this money on payroll, and only 40% of it, or I'm sorry, only 25% of it could be used for non-payroll related expenses. They have now changed that to 60% must be used, at least 60% must be used for payroll, and no more than 40% can be used for non-payroll related expenses. However, if you don't use at least 60% of the loan on payroll, you will be paying 100% of that back. So yes, they've loosened up the restrictions on that a little bit in terms of what it can be spent on, but if you don't spend it absolutely correctly, you will be paying the entire thing back. So be tracking that. Now, FTEs. Now, this has been a huge question for people too, because, you know, what happens to my head count if I lose an employee? And under the original legislation, they did have a portion in there under salaries and wages and the head count that if an employee voluntarily quit or was terminated for cause, we are allowed to adjust the FTE calculations as well as the salary and wages for that loss. However, the other problem was, well, what if we couldn't find a qualified employee? What if we simply can't seem to ramp up our operations fast enough for us to get that fixed? And they have actually said we can now adjust for that as long as the reason those things are happening are a direct result of COVID-19. We also have a lot more time to fix the problem. Originally, we had to have this fixed by June 30th. Now we have until the end of December to get it fixed. So there are a lot of different things happening that are creating a lot more breathing room. Also, under the original legislation, they said you still had to pay your federal tax deposits on time. If you are an employer who has employees, you know you pay the employer portion of federal income and unemployment taxes. And originally they said you had to pay these on time. Now they are saying you can defer these payments. However, I do not recommend that you do that. If you can pay them, please pay them, because in my experience, once you start deferring those items, it gets harder and harder to dig yourself out of that hole. And it tends to be the area in which most businesses get themselves in trouble. So while they say you can defer it, it's not something that I really recommend. Now, one of the things that this bill did not address, I was kind of hoping it would, was crossing my fingers, was the tax deductibility of the expenses on which you spend these PPP funds. Current guidance is from the IRS that anything that you pay with these funds is not going to be deductible for tax purposes, meaning they're legitimate business expenses. We just can't put them on the tax return, which really undermines the entire point of the PPP, was to not make it a taxable event. It was not addressed in that. That guidance still stands right now. There are already rumblings of this going into the court system, so I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. Some senators at the beginning of May did submit a bill to Congress to reverse that decision for PPP purposes that, as far as I can tell, has gained absolutely no ground whatsoever, and I'm not really sure why. I don't know if that's just not a priority right now and they're going to address it later, or what's really happening there. But you really do need to be tracking those expenses separately, just in case when it comes to tax time next year, if we cannot deduct them, it's going to be easy for your preparers to handle that. I have put out a video about all the things about the PPP that could possibly get you into a little bit of troubles. For example, EIDL grants. I've been trying to drill this into everybody's heads. If you receive an EIDL grant, that's going to reduce the flexibility or the forgivability of your PPP. So if you received a $5,000 grant, you can be expecting to pay $5,000 of that PPP back no matter what. They are starting to make some motions in terms of what they're going to do with people who did not use the money for the appropriate expenses, or perhaps you borrowed the money but didn't actually need it. The SBA is going to have up to 6 years from the time you pay this loan off to audit what you did with this money and whether you actually needed it. So that means some of you are going to be having to hold on to this paperwork for 11 years if you get the 5-year, clearly if you get the 5-year loan. And they're not really being super direct about what could happen. Now, some of these things are simply just going to reduce the forgiveness. But in terms of people who took this money, as you know, there was like a great big money grab at the beginning of all of this. And even I worked with a couple of people who just wanted the free money. You know, if you were one of those people, I would be contacting a lawyer, because if you were audited on this, you know, that could become an issue later on. Another issue that I'm kind of worried about is people failing to prove what they spent this money on. So please make sure you are documenting everything and putting it where you can find it easily, because trying to rebuild this later on down the road is going to be very difficult. And in some cases, they are talking that there could be civil or criminal charges levied, which is why you probably need to be talking to your consultants, your CPAs, and talking to a lawyer in some cases. So they're still not being super clear on how all that's going to work, just that they'll have 6 years to audit you from the time you pay it off. Trying to think, is there any? All right, so now for the forgiveness application, do not apply for forgiveness yet. We have plenty of time, and the bottom line, I think, is in the next couple of weeks, more guidance is going to be coming out, and they are trying to retool that application to make it simpler. The banks will not be calculating the forgiveness. The government isn't going to be calculating the forgiveness. Those of you who took the PPP loan are going to be responsible for calculating the forgiveness, which is actually going to be my next video next Wednesday, is just going through that calculating process. Now, just so you know, it's illegal for anybody to charge you money on the PPP stuff in terms of helping you apply for it. So if somebody's charging you money to help you apply for it, be careful with that. But I would be tapping in to your bookkeepers, your CPAs, whoever, to get the numbers you need to hopefully calculate that as accurately as possible. I know that we will be helping our clients do that every chance we get. And Pamela asked the question if it's better to use all of the PPP on payroll. And my answer to that is what I have been recommending to my clients for a couple of different reasons. One, payroll is going to be very easy to prove because payroll reports are generated and they're easy to get your hands on. And then there's no question that you were using it on the correct expenses. If you use this on any non-payroll related expenses, you have to be careful because there are some that are allowable, but they are not forgivable. And a really good example of this is like credit card debt interest. We are allowed to use the PPP funds to pay credit card debt interest, but that will not be an allowable expense. You are allowed to pay a mortgage payment with the PPP, but only the interest is going to be forgivable, not the principal of it. And so I think there's been a lot of confusion around that particular area. So yes, if you only use it on PPP or the PPP on payroll, that isn't going to hurt anything at all. I'm trying to see, were there any other questions that I missed? All right, it doesn't look like I did. So that's pretty much my spiel. And again, I'm going to be working on helping you all figure out how to calculate that forgiveness. But hold off, don't do it yet. We have time. Let's make sure we have all of the information.
Thank you, Misty. I think there is one question. Because we will be out of money due to the original timelines, will there be any opportunity to borrow more?
I don't think so. I think this is the end of the line. June 30th is going to be the end of the line. Now, of course, there are still going to be other options for you. There are the regular SBA loans. I know some banks have been coming out with their own programs, but in terms of the PPP, according to the legislation, June 30th is the end of the line here. I also see a question from Phil regarding, okay, if you sent letters to all employees with a return date and they decided not to return, they would not count against your head count. That is correct. If you are not able to hire a qualified employee to replace them.
Okay. Is there any more questions for Misty, Jenny, or Jody? Any questions for our three guests before we move on? I don't see any. I think we're good. Kylie, are we good to move on now?
Yes,
Okay.
we are.
So we're going to I'm going to go ahead now and call on Kylie Seibert, our Vice President of Corporate Communications, to give you an update on events and things of that nature. So Kylie, it's all yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. We do still have quite a lot of masks available. So if you or any other small business owner that you know needs masks, you can pick them up from our office Monday to Friday, 8 till 12, or any of the other locations that you see listed there on the peninsula as well, have them on those days and times. So they're also on our website listed if you don't have time to write that down right now. So please, even if you need more yourselves, please ask. We do have plenty available that's still in stock. Okay, and now we do have an upcoming webinar, June 23rd, which is our loss prevention, which we usually have at a lunchtime. So we actually moved it to 9 to 10 a.m. and it's going to be a webinar using technology to assist against COVID-19. So that'll be a good one. It's going to be presented by Matthew Natadis from Security 101, and he has presented before in the past, and he's a very good presenter. So he'll be talking about the different technologies to use in battling this pandemic. So that's, please register on our website for that. What else do we have going on? I just wanted to also, Ray, I don't know whether you want to talk a little bit about this, but we have just announced our Lifetime Achievement Award winner for 2020, which is Houses Jewelers in Newport News. Ray?
Catching me by surprise.
I could certainly talk if you prefer me to.
Well, this is an interesting Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. They've been around since over 100 years, 120 years, I believe. So they've gone through 4 generations. It's an incredible story. One thing we are doing with the retail.
Oh, Ray's frozen, it seems. If he doesn't come on, I'll continue.
Of our various category winners, recipients, as well as celebrating our Lifetime Achievement Award recipient as well.
So Ray, you froze at the beginning of that. So I think people might have missed what you'd said. with the changes to Roddy.
Daggone it, that was good too. I said we're not having the changes with Roddy. We're not having a in-person or face-to-face event like we typically do. However, that is not preventing us from moving ahead and recognizing our categorical recipients, as well as celebrating our Lifetime Achievement Award recipient as well. Kylie, how many categories do we have? And you might want to just touch on what the process for voting is.
Okay, we will be launching a new plan, but a lot of this will be, actually was very clever that we did this before the COVID-19 hit, but we're changing the process to be a lot more about peer voting. So we've updated our plan. We've got about 25 categories that we will be awarding winners to. So that gives us, everyone a little bit more opportunity to be awarded a prize. They will all be announced very shortly. But we're looking at July, August period. And so yes, nothing more than that really right now, but we will be sharing that through our newsletters and website and social media in the next few days. Anything else you wanted me to share, Ray?
Okay, no, that's good. Okay, well, did we talk about any mask pickup?
Yes, so we've covered all the locations for the masks. I did want to mention, there is a couple more grants that have been provided by cities and localities. They're also on our website under the coronavirus page, under financial assistance. So please look out for those. If you, I know a lot of the businesses have been applying wherever they can. And I know some of these have just opened up their dates again for different rounds. So please go and have a look. A lot of these localities, if you haven't subscribed to their newsletters, like from the economic development or from the cities, please do so, because they're updating people, on their latest, programs. So please do that. Otherwise, we're trying to keep track of it as well and sharing it on our website. And you can look at any of our other resources as well, all the other briefings that are being recorded, all of our strives and so on. So we will continue to have them available to everyone.
Well, thank you, Kylie. We will continue with the COVID-19 briefings until we at least get into phase 3. And we will keep you updated as far as the scheduling of that once this occurs. So our next briefing will be again next Friday, and that is June 19th, and 9:30, same time, same place. And please feel free to reach out to any of your membership advisors. If you have any questions or need any assistance, take advantage of the masks for your staff. We're going to be making rounds back again and dropping them off. So until then, be safe and let us know if you need anything. Have a great day.
All right. I think there was just one more question, Lisa, if you wanted to stay on separately, but special marketing opportunities, that's okay. We have been, like Beth Cook, I know, has been including any of those opportunities in her emails, and Tina as well. So as we come across them, we will add to our website. I know that there has been some discounted advertising that's been offered through various partners of ours and the media. So we will get some of that updated and let you know as well. But if there's something in particular you're after, please let us know.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
That concludes it.